Hey, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Parenting Connections. But if you're listening by podcast, you're actually on the God, Family, and Politics show. And so today I'm kind of excited, and I try not to be too political. I tried to bite my tongue, but we've gotten to an age to where Christians can't bite their tongues anymore. We can't sit by and let political correctness send destruction on a lot of people, and the political correctness is really harming America right now. It has been, and so even much more, the silencing of the church and the silencing of Christians. I know during the pandemic that it was the perfect chance for the government to silence Christians. And so today we're going to be talking to Jeanne Nigro. She's a seasoned speaker and author with a unique depth of knowledge of insight gained from the background, which spans from corporate, ministry, and political worlds. And so she is our expert today. Jeanne, welcome. Am I pronouncing
Thank you so much. It's Jeannie Nigro.
Jeanne Nigro. Jeannie, could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. First of all, Doc Hodges, it's great to be on your show. And as you mentioned, I have a wide background, but really spent about 20 years in the corporate world doing a lot of consulting, organizational change consulting. And then I've had my own ministry, 501c3, Jeanne Nigro Ministries, for the past 15 years or so. And it's basically a teaching ministry. I'm an author and a speaker, but I've been teaching for years on all kinds of deception, the lies we believe about ourselves, the lies we believe about God, how that impacts our lives, how that keeps us in bondage to fear and shame and unforgiveness and all those things. And so I've always had a heart to bust deception. And then through just a sequence of events and the Lord leading, never thought I would go into politics, but ended up living in New York and DC, and ran for Congress in Manhattan for 2020. And unfortunately, my campaign came to an end with a lockdown. We actually got locked out of New York because we happened to be in California when the lockdown happened. And so the time that I was kind of stuck in California, ended up writing this book. The Lord kind of brought it all together with my passion to bust through deception, and then and then my heart to teach on intimacy with God. So I really brought it all, and end times. So I really brought that all together in this book that is just newly released, The Lies We Believe About Faith and Politics, The Way Forward. Because I didn't want to just emphasize the lies, we have enough of that, but I wanted to emphasize the way forward, what we can do as believers.
Okay, so I am doing live videos in an office that is censored to turn off lights when we're not using them. And so you'll have to excuse me because, like I said, on this show, you get the real deal. You get the real
That's
deal.
right. That's good. I love it.
True life scenarios. Jeanne, and I'm gonna go with Miss Nigro because okay, I can say that easier. Jeannie, that's it. People think, when the Constitution put into effect a separation of church and politics, or church and state, do you believe that Christians should be involved with politics?
Absolutely, I do. And that's what a lot of that emphasize in the book, because, what I really think, sometimes when the church teaches against politics or against believers being involved in politics, I wish there was a better word besides politics. Even in my book, I struggled with, gosh, should we call it something else? Because it just has such a negative connotation. Right. But when I think about politics, it's really, it's government, it's morality. And it's fighting for righteousness. And if we are believers, if we're following Jesus, if we are, called to fight for righteousness, to stand against evil, to stand for truth, and think about what is God for? God's for life. He's for freedom. He's for truth. So if we are for those things, we have to stand for those things. Now, when government or politics or whatever word you want to use starts to mandate and legislate morality or freedom or life or truth when they start mandating lies or legislating lies, whatever it might be. To me, that's not politics. This is spiritual warfare. And so if we are believers with God's Jesus Spirit in us, we're called to fight the spiritual warfare. We're called to stand for truth, because I think that really, and I actually have a chapter on this very topic. Political battles to me are truly, maybe that's what they look like on the outside. That's what we see in the physical, but they're truly spiritual battles. And all of these attacks on our freedom, on life, on morality, on truth, the lies and so forth, all of that is really an attack on God. And so that's why I even ran for Congress in the first place. I didn't have a political background. I wasn't political per se, wasn't a career politician, but I was a deception buster, and I love God. And when I saw how these attacks were really attacks on God, that's when I said, that's it. You can have your political beliefs, you can believe what you want, but when you're attacking God, I have to get involved here.
And this is the thing. So if there's and God knows, I mean, the Lord has made himself so real to me in so many situations, but just for devil advocacy, which I don't advocate for the devil, but if there was no God, then there would be no need for morality, right? And so God has set the standard on how we live and how we treat each other. But if God truly doesn't exist, then all hell can just happen and break forth, and it doesn't matter. And so we have people that are in control of our government right now that don't believe in God. And some claim to believe in God. So if they do believe in God and they're doing all this stuff, that means they have placed a war on God. So they believe in God. They know, because the Bible says that truth has been embedded in us. And so it's in us to believe, but we choose to suppress that.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're suppressing that, so we have these people that are in office that say that they believe in God,
right,
but then are fighting against God, then you're right. It is a spiritual battle. And it's a spiritual battle. And the more that we shut up, the more they take.
Yeah, if we are, again, believers, or however you want to call it, I used to call it sometimes we're in his end times army. Well, it's a spiritual battle, so that's what we're called to. Okay, so we're not called to politics; we're called to spiritual battle. Well, then let's get in the spiritual battle. And to add on to what you're saying, Doc Hodges, about people in office or wherever they are that say they believe in God, I like to also ask the question of well, how have they defined God? They can say they believe in God, but everybody, in a sense, puts their own definition on God. And so, and many times in my own life, I'm constantly asking God, show me what lies I'm believing about you. When I'm fearful, when I'm feeling shut down or putting myself down or angry or whatever it is, it's okay, God, what lie am I believing about you? And I actually pray that for people in office. God, please show them if they're believing lies about you, because I think sometimes either overtly or not even realizing it, they're believing lies about God, or they are defining God, and that's, I think that leads into a lot of the policies and so forth. If you look at well, this is fair and caring, wouldn't Jesus do this, or isn't Jesus loving? Well, how do you define love? Is that just enabling everybody to do whatever they want to do, no matter who's hurt in it, or is it really truth and love have to go together? And I think that so much in our culture, and definitely in our politics or in our government, is a result of people defining God the way they want to define it, or defining truth the way they want to define truth, or defining love and fair and caring the way they want to, not the biblical definition.
I heard somebody preach, I think it was Tommy Birchfield, but I'm not sure if it was him or not, years ago, probably 30 years ago, that preached a message called "Believe a Lie and Die."
Wow.
So
that's true.
we have a nation to where you can tell, you got to be smart. You got to be smarter than what people are telling you, because
right.
mind control is a true story.
It's hypnosis.
So if you hear a lie enough, if you hear it enough, it becomes like a truth, and you start spewing it. You start spewing it. So we watched the last 4 years of every day of mainstream media coming on and telling you lies. So if you even spent 5 minutes listening to some of those lies, you start to believe it. And it took people with discernment to realize what was going on. Even 2 years ago, it took a lot of discernment to realize, hold on. So now a peaceful protest is where you go burn down buildings and whole cities. But yet you go to the Capitol and try to get them to look at something again, and then you're a terrorist.
That's right.
So if a parent decides that she wants education to teach education and not a whole bunch of other crap, then you are a parent terrorist. And so lies,
Lies, and all you have to do is use that label, racist, terrorist, whatever it is, and then they think that people are going to be afraid, afraid of rejection, afraid of punishment or whatever, and then they use that as power, and behind it all is fear. It's manipulating, it's hypnotizing, basically through fear, and that's what they've been doing for, especially in the past few years.
Jeannie, but they're taking everything away from you. If you stand up against the lie,
That's right.
if you speak contrary to the lies, they are destroying you. They are taking away your homes, they're taking away your livelihood, they are silencing you, and they are punishing you. And so when Christians sit back, when the church, speak a little bit about this. When the church decides not to do their job, I mean, think about it. You expect your minister to preach on what's in the word. A lot of times we just hear really good motivational speeches, but we're not preaching on there's not a lot of preaching in the word. You hear a couple of scriptures, and then you go on about your week. But it's more motivational speeches. And so when the church sets back and does not get involved, what happens? Speak a little on.
Yeah, I think when one of the things that I want to say too is that, and we'll probably talk more about this later, like what can we do? But in whatever we do, whether we're fighting for righteousness or freedom or whatever it is, it has to be fueled by intimacy with God. We have to be in a place of intimacy with God. Otherwise, we're fueled by anger, by control, by fear, and then we look like everybody else, and it just ends up with division and so forth. But I think when we're rooted and we're fueled in intimacy with God, it's really, when I look at intimacy with God, it's, I always pray, God, help me to see what you see, help me to feel what you feel, help me to think what you think. Well, if you're doing that, because we're, ultimately we want to be transformed into Jesus' image, it's just a lifelong process. But we were saying, help me to have your thoughts, your emotions, or what do you see about this situation? Or what do you see about this person, or with this policy, or this politician, or whatever it might be? Or how do you see me? How do you see yourself? Lord, help me to see me as you see me. And when we do that, we have to have an anger, almost a righteous anger about crime, about death, about things that bring death. To me, it's simple. It's like, these things either lead to life or they lead to death. And the lies, which are from Satan, the father of lies, always lead to death. So if we are just standing back, the Bible says if you see the good to do and you don't do it, it's sin. If we are just standing back and allowing sin to take place, allowing evil to take place, allowing this attack on God to take place, if we're not seeing what he sees, if we're not thinking what he thinks about the situation, feeling what he feels about the situation, who's getting ground? It's Satan. Every moment of the day, we have a choice of whether we're going to release God's power in whatever the situation is, or if we're going to give the enemy ground. Every time we choose to believe a lie, and every time we fear or shame or whatever it is that blocks God's intimacy, we are giving Satan ground. So there's never this neutral time when it's like peace, with spiritual warfare. It's a 24/7 thing. And so if the church, that's an individual basis. Now, if the church as a whole, a body of a number of individuals chooses to not see how God sees and feel like he feels and thinks how he thinks. And if they choose to allow evil, then we're giving the enemy just incredible amount of power and ground on the earth, more than he has now. So it's like, when I look at it that way, and that it helps me in my personal life. So that, if I'm fearful or if I'm upset or if I'm angry, whatever it is, and I think, is it really worth giving the enemy ground to hold on to this?
Yeah.
And we have to look at that individually, and we have to look at it as a corporate body of believers.
You know, we often portray God as this all loving, and he is,
Of
but
course.
this all living, hey, Sarah, Sarah,
Mhm.
that anything goes and he'll always forgive you. And he is forgiving. But that we should just love, peace, kiss everybody, and that, and I believe that sometimes we have a misconception of
That's it.
who he really
That's
is.
that lie about God.
Yes, and because he's a
Absolutely.
king. And so when you talk about, you had a list of some of the lies, that one of them was, we should support policies, candidates, and media messages that are fair and caring, because Jesus once was fair and caring. Jesus was caring, but there was another side to Jesus as well. You
That's
talk a
right,
little bit about
and I love that you're hitting on this, because this was one of my pet peeves, I guess, that really pushes my button, because I think so much of liberal policy, or all liberal policies, get messaged really well, but they get messaged as being fair and caring or loving, and in the church they get messaged as being, this is what Jesus would do, or this is how Jesus would be. Jesus was loving. He loved the poor. He loved the immigrant. He loved, all these people. And but he also shared truth. He also stood up. Obviously, was very angry against lies and against unrighteousness. And I think we have to look at that lie of fair and caring and say, one, who is this fair and caring to in the long run? And oftentimes it's the government that it's building. It's building a bigger government. It's giving more money and control to the government. Is it fair and caring to take away someone's potential in life, the potential that God has given them? Is it fair and caring to take away their choices? The choice is, God always gives us free will. He gives us free will to love him or not, to accept him or not. But is it fair and caring that it impacts their family? Is it fair and caring that they lose their property? So I think I call it litmus test, but a number of questions we can ask when we hear a message or hear a policy or hear a sermon, and it's talking about Jesus being for socialism, or Jesus being for open borders, or whatever it is. If you ask yourself, go down those questions and say, wait a minute, who does this really benefit in the long run? And you'll find that with most of these liberal policies, it's not the individual, or maybe it helps one individual, but at the expense of everyone else around them. And so we have to look at, which policies are going to be the most beneficial for the most number of people, and which ones are going to give people freedom and the opportunity to, God has created each one of us with a very specific, very important, very not a mistake purpose. And if the government is taking away our freedom to fulfill that purpose, that's against God. That is an attack against God. And that's, if it's taking away our individuality and making us all just these almost like, not male, not female, not, with a face, not, just this blob of people that just, blends in for the good of the government. That's an attack on God, because we were made in his image.
Okay, so what about people that think that we should never question the government leaders and authority over us? God wants us to obey everyone, or obey
Obey the
people.
leaders, yeah.
Yeah.
That I hear so much. It's like, well, God put them in office, so we must obey them. But we have to look at, wait a minute, why did God institute government? God instituted government to protect the innocent, and really to punish those who were lawless. And so if government is taking the role of almost flip-flopping that. And Satan's always a good counterfeit, where it's the innocent that are being punished, or the innocent that are having their freedoms taken away. And it's the lawless who are being given freedom to do more lawlessness. Wait a minute, we have to stand up against that. Is not a biblical use of authority. That is called abuse. And whether it's in relationships or marriages or government, God never endorses abuse. It's not from him. He will not will us to be in an abusive, tyrannical situation.
And so you see this balance to where, okay, so you have people getting rights, but you see the Christians losing rights, and there's a big power struggle to take away we already talked about silencing of the church, but the silencing of believers to take away their right. We see this in Canada. You cannot speak out against biblical principles that you believe in, and you can be punished, you can be jailed. And so we see that trying to come down.
The hate speech.
Yes, they call it hate speech, and they call you bigot, they call you racist, and we see this. We hear a lot of people in unless you really study other countries that have adopted socialism.
That's right.
Look at Venezuela that adopted socialism, and it turned out very bad. And so what we have in the United States is a republic. And Ben Franklin, a woman asked Ben Franklin, hey, so is this a democracy or democratic that you've established here? And he says, no, it's a republic, dear lady. If we can keep it, that's what we've established. And the thing right now, we're fighting to keep the republic. And so, and it's a battle, it's a war.
Well, we're at a place now where if we do not stand up now, and the church does not stand up, we're risking losing our country. We are losing our country. It is happening. I mean, it is happening every single day. Freedoms are being taken away in social media, even just everywhere, and lies of the media, the mainstream media. It's just. I even talk, I think it was almost a chapter on the mainstream media in my book, because I talk about what is the fruit. Like if you look at, say, the mainstream, what is the fruit of what their message is? The fruit is typically division,
fear.
It's always division. It's always fear, anger. You end up hearing this message and you have fear. You hate another group, or you blame another group. It's always it's the fruit of Satan. It's the fruit. It's not fruit of the spirit. It's fruit of the flesh or of the enemy. And so you have to look at that. And like you said, you have to have discernment when you hear these messages, and not, especially from preachers, and not be deceived by this whole fair and caring. Jesus was socialist. He wants us to give our things away and all. No, that God stands for, he made us as individuals. He's all through the Bible is I would call it endorsement, but if private property is his will, and having choice, like I said, even choice. He never takes away our choice, even to whether we want to pursue him or not, whether we want to have intimacy with him. It's always our choice. He never forces things on us out of his love. And so you have to take that core character, and I talk a lot about this, just the core character of God, who he is, that he doesn't lie, that he doesn't change, that he is for freedom and life. And obviously we want, abortion is a huge issue. But sometimes that's all we think of when we think of pro-life. But life is, the life in every way. How does it impact us physically? How does it impact us emotionally? How does it impact our family life? How does this message of this, policy or mandate or whatever, how does this impact our psychological life, our ability to pursue the dreams that God has given us, or the potential or the purpose that God has given us? So we have to look at all, when I say life, the kind of the bigger picture, all in all areas, physical, psychological, social, spiritual.
And people that say that Jesus was a socialist, because he healed and because he was establishing himself as God, as Emmanuel, God with us. He was establishing himself as the Son of God. And so when with me a little bit about, okay, so he did tell the rich young ruler okay, so if you want what I have, go sell everything that you have and give it to the poor. So you have people basing everything on that. And so what do you have to say to that?
Well, I think we have to look at that situation that he was talking to this rich young ruler because he was speaking to the condition of his heart. He knew that his heart, what was in his heart, was blocking, basically, I put in my language, was blocking intimacy with Jesus. And he desires more than anything for us to have intimacy with him. So he's always going to show us, whether it's our riches or whether it's our attitudes or whether it's our fears. He's always going to show us if we ask him. And that's a great example, but I love it because he always answers our questions. He's always going to show us what blocks intimacy with him. Now, that you don't build a theology, or you don't build a government around that specific example where Jesus was showing him what was in his heart that was blocking intimacy with him. You have to look at the whole authority of Scripture. And that's what I did really when I wrote this, because I wanted to know for myself. I really studied it. And I looked at, he always is speaking about, personal property lines, all through the Bible. There's always, he's saying, this belongs to this family, and then what happens in the inheritance. And so there's always this emphasis on, personal or private property. The government is in place to do good. Government, the only people that benefit in a socialist government is the dictators. The dictators get richer and filthy rich, and the people have nothing. They have no freedom. They have no choice. And also, there's a kind of an emphasis on, well, everybody's the same. No, God did not make everybody the same. He did not. He has a specific purpose for each one of us, and we need to be productive. God has given us the desire to work, the desire to be productive. We feel good when we're productive because we're made in His image. So God is productive. God is creative, and He's given us His personality in that sense, and so when there's any kind of a system that's blocking that, and socialist government also control worship. They have state-run churches just to make it look like they have a church, so they are blocking also our ability to worship God freely. So there's I think I have a whole list of things in a chapter on socialism, and I just have covered some of them now. But if you really look at all of those things, it's like, no, the Bible does not, and it's the opposite. The Bible does not, and Jesus did not support socialism. I think when preachers do that, they're pulling, and so many of these things, if you look at liberal policies, they're pulling these politicians that don't have a relationship with God. They say believe in God, and then all of a sudden they'll use a Bible script. They'll pick a Bible scripture out. So it's taking one scripture out of context and building an entire government policy or legislation around it. And you can never do that with anything. We have to look at the entire storyline of the Bible and where it's going. And you look at that about Jesus too. Jesus is coming. When Jesus comes back, first thing he's going to do is slay all the kings of the earth that are gathered around Jerusalem. He's going to have blood on his robes from executing all of the rulers, all the kings of the earth. Does that sound like someone who just is like la-di-da, like you said? No, he's serious about righteousness. He's serious about evil.
There may be the day where you need to sell your cloak and buy a dagger. Jesus said that. He says, I don't come to bring peace. I come to bring division between a mother and a daughter-in-law, and into family, because ultimately it's a choice that we have to make. And so there's one last thing I kind of want to leave on, and take as much time talking about this as you need. But right now, how our country is divided, against Democrats and Republicans. And I got to tell you, neither side, gets it all the way, gets it right. You have one side that's for big government. Let's take away everything. And just to my, a party, and I'm going to talk about both sides. And so you have a Democratic Party that believes in taking away big government, taking away rights, let us control everybody, let us feed you so
We know better than you.
we snatch that away from you. But it's also a party that supported Margaret Sanger in her eradication of the Negro, the undesirables, and through Planned Parenthood. It's
That's
a
right.
party that supports that. And then it's a party that was the party of racism. And it is still racism. They love to call other people racist when in fact they're the racist. How are you going to call somebody a racist when you don't know them, but you're the one that's always bringing up race and division?
Right.
Then you have the Republican Party who are, they're for, small government, people owning their businesses and lands, but there's no backbone. Where is your backbone? You say that you stand for you say that you're a Christian, but where is your backbone when it comes? You back down at every chance. It is to prove strong, to prove to get our country back, to go back to the Constitution that we have. And people that say that the Constitution is racist, you have not read the Constitution, because in that divine, that was given to them by God.
That's right.
Our standards and our freedoms. Yes, America didn't get perfect. Yes, America did have racism, but I tell you what, it was the Republican Party that fought for the freedom of the Black people. And so it's the Democratic Party that was standing there with bats and stuff that said, if you vote, we gonna mow you down if being Black and stuff. And so okay, so I totally went off on that.
But that's they're excellent points. Thank you.
But I just got kind of passionate about
the
people that, choosing side, because neither side is getting it right. And I'm waiting for the day where another party will come forth and stand for the truths and stand for the people and stand for God and the Constitution and how it writs. Do you have anything to say to that? I'm sorry. I do.
Because
hold on, I hit the wrong button. Stop.
Oh, that's okay. I was torn with all the political events that happened in our country and in my own life, because I was running as a Republican in New York City. And then I actually switched my campaign to independent, because a Republican cannot even be heard in New York City. It's 75% Democrat. And also I learned a lot from the whole experience. I'll just put it that way. And it really woke me up to, and that's why I emphasize so much in the book about focus on these characters of God, that whatever we're fighting for, one, it has to be rooted in intimacy with God, but it's because we're fighting in a sense for God. We're looking at, what does he want? He wants life. He came to bring life. He wants freedom, truth, individuality, those things. And we have to keep our eyes focused on God, but on those things, because if we put our hope or our focus in a particular party, they will let us down, whether it's Democrat or Republican. There's corruption on both sides. There are humans on both sides. Yeah. There are people with strongholds on both sides that are giving the enemy ground, in their Republican Party and the Democrat Party. They're all believing lies about themselves and about God. And it's the nature of us as humans. And so I think that what we have to do is, one, we want to support and align with candidates who are the most closely aligned with biblical principles, with the essence of God, in terms of, they're not godly. I mean, they're not God, but I mean, the essence of God in terms of they're aligned with policies that will lead to life for people, that will lead to freedom for, that. So we want to align with people who are the most closely aligned with, I'll call it biblical principles, but we can't put our faith and all of our hope in the party or the candidate, because even if we elect the candidate who's the closest to biblical principles, they're going to let us down, because they're human. And the political system that I experienced in my campaign is the structure of it itself, and just how it operates and how DC operates really feeds the sin nature. I mean, I found myself going, here I never thought I would be looking at people as dollar signs. And because there's so much emphasis on fundraising, you can't help but look at people as, are they going to donate or not? And I'm thinking, this is not God. So just the system itself, I'm just trying to say, it feeds the flesh. And so even the most godly person is going to be pulled because of just the system that they're in and that they're trying to stay in so they can do good. So we have to really pray for especially for our Christian politicians and officials, because they are in such spiritual warfare. So we really need to pray for them and have some grace for them, but also know that we can't put our 100% of our hope has, our focus has to be on, I'm doing this because I'm aligning with God. I want to release God's purposes. I don't want to give the enemy ground. I want to promote or advance or do what I can to advance what's of God, individuality, free choice, freedom, life and truth. And I want to stand against evil and immorality. And that's why I'm doing this. And that's why I'm supporting this candidate, because they're more closely aligned, or that's why I'm voting for this person because they're more closely aligned. Are they the Messiah? No, they're not. They're not going to be perfect, but that's where we want to go. But we can't put our faith or hope in a particular party, because they're made up, unfortunately, of humans that are pulled by many things. But even if they're the most, like I said, godly individual, they're in a system that just it's like puts like the plug in for the flesh, just from the system that they're in DC. And please pray for them, because they're under. Just in my campaign, I couldn't believe the warfare that I was in. And you go back to the root of this nation, like you said, the Constitution, inspired by God, biblical, rooted in biblical principles. This nation founded on religious freedom. So Satan has been, targeting obviously this nation, a light to the world, since the very beginning, and it's just intensified as we see now. So there's such a battle for this nation, and we need to really keep our eyes focused on God, stay in intimacy with God, do what we can, yes, to fight for righteousness, but even just starting in our individual lives, be aware of the things that block our own intimacy with God, so that whatever we do is not rooted in or driven by fear or anger or bitterness.
I want to close leaving you with this question. Do you think an independent could ever win a presidential election?
I think it would be pretty difficult, because it requires the elections and all of these campaigns. I was just shocked at how much money they require, how much fundraising they require, how much backing of so many. If you're running as a Republican, you have to be backed by like every Republican organization in your district, or take that bigger, the country. So it's such a much more complex system than you could ever imagine. And so I think it would be pretty, obviously nothing's impossible, but I think it would be pretty difficult, in my own opinion.
Are you running currently, or are you already in office? Or
I'm not now. No, I'm not now. I pray about it in the future, because, like I said, my campaign was cut short, unfortunately, with everything that happened in New York City, the first being hit with the lockdown and everything.
Right.
And so I just feel like I'm kind of just coming back on the scene now, able to get out there and travel and get my book out there. And it's been great to just be back in this world, but also to be a different voice, and to really try, my passion as well is trying to ignite the church, or trying to wake up the church, because of anyone that should be fighting for truth and righteousness, and standing against evil, and fighting this, engaging in the spiritual warfare, it should be the church.
It should be. It really should be. And like I said, when I go back to the lockdowns, it was a huge target. It was their chance finally. And so you always make the most of a tragedy, and you try to, you try to, grab what you can. And so the grab was to shut down the church, to keep us, because wherever two or more are gathered in his name,
That's
Jesus
right.
said, I'll be in the midst. And so if the idea was to keep the church from praying together,
That's
keep
right.
them from interacting together, because our strength is in
That's
that
right.
power of the togetherness. And so that was the force behind that. And so, but thank you so much for being on
Thank
the show,
you.
watching out for you. We're going to be supporting you, and we're going to be praying for you.
Amen. Thank you. I appreciate
And
it. It's been wonderful. I'm so glad to get to talk with you and know you. It's been wonderful. I want to talk more.
yes, and then we will. So always keep me posted on what you're doing next, because we want to follow and support you.
Sounds good.
Thank you for coming to the show. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing. Sharing is caring. And so we'll see you next time on the Parenting Connection Show.